What's going on, guys? It's Danny from Slow Restoration. Today in the shop we have a 2014, something a little different actually, a 2014 Subaru Outback. All-wheel drive. This does have the 4-cylinder engine in it, and you can hear that. Definitely in need of some brakes. We're actually metal to metal on this side, so let's go ahead and get the wheels pulled off. Make sure we have the right parts first. The wheels off. I grabbed the new rotor, just kind of threw it on there. You can throw it on backwards just to kind of check. You can see overall diameter, make sure the bolt pattern in the center is right. It's a solid non-vented rotor. And it does have the drum inside for the emergency brake shoes. So as far as the rotors go, this looks right. Now brake pads, we got our new pads out and we'll just kind of compare them. These look right, but I'll go ahead and pull them apart just to make sure. And this car only has 35,000 miles on it, and the rear brakes are done. We are going to check the front while we have it in here, but you can see the size of these things. You don't have much friction material there, so even a lower miles car, depending on your driving habits, could need brake repair sooner than later. Like I said, at 35,000 miles, normally cars go a lot longer than that with brake pads, but it is what it is. This one needs it, so we're going to do the whole works here. And I'm sure most of you know this, but some of these brake pads will have a indicator on them. Some people call it a brake squealer. When that gets down, the pad gets down so low, this metal tab will actually rub on the road, making an annoying squealing sign or sound, and that signals that you need to check and or replace your brakes. So definitely make sure you orient this in the same spot that you took it off, because sometimes this can interfere if you have it inboard and it should be outboard, or outboard and it should be inboard. So first step is we have a 14mm wrench on here. We'll go ahead and break the caliper itself loose. A couple things to check as you're disassembling your brakes is for possible cause of premature failure. And anything that's sticking or binding is obviously going to be an issue. These are floating calipers, which means there's a piston on the inside, and as it pushes on that pad, the caliper actually floats or moves, and that allows it to, this part of the piston or the caliper to put pressure on the pad opposite the piston. So this needs to slide back and forth freely, so we'll inspect that as we go. But first, let's just go ahead and get these mounting bolts off. We'll get that one out of the way. This one, the hose is actually keeping it, but that's fine. So we'll go ahead and pull that caliper loose. It's very light. Normally you would tie that up if it was a heavy caliper, but this is a aluminum caliper. We're just going to set it up to the side here, make sure it doesn't fall, and we'll get to that in a minute. But while we're here, let's go ahead. So you can see that slide moves nice and freely, as does that one. These are rubber like bellow seals here, and we will re-grease them and make sure everything's lubed up. But this looks good. This is what you're looking for. So we'll go ahead and get our wore out pads. We'll get a screwdriver and pry them out, but I can see this one is actually wore down too on the inside, and the outside is very, very close. So even though that side hit first, we still have pretty even pad life here. And the easy way of getting them out is just trying, I mean, obviously we're not saving anything. The pads are wore out, the rotors are wore out, so we can take a screwdriver and just get it started and just pry in between the pad and the rotor, and that will slide out. Again, you want the pads to technically slide freely in there. These are wore out. There's a bunch of debris, so we are going to replace these steel shims on either side also. The brake pads did come with them once we get this apart. So let me get the pads pulled out. We'll get the shims popped off, and then since we are replacing the rotor, we'll have to remove this brake caliper bracket. And speaking of that indicator, as you can see, Right there is the indicator. As you can see there, that shiny tip, this was hitting, just starting to hit. Pad life is very low, and that does make a squealing sound, but unfortunately the other side hit metal to metal before this was warned. So either way, we're replacing everything anyway, but this was on the passenger side inboard. May or may not be the same on your car, but definitely check the orientation of that indicator. And to take that off, we have two 14mm headed bolts on the back side here. Go ahead and back them out. They will be a little tight. You'll need something a little bigger to break those loose. But once that's bolts are removed, you can go ahead and slide that off. We'll get this cleaned up and get it ready for our new shims. We did pull the shims off in the meantime, but we'll get all this cleaned up, get our new shims on, and re-lube these slides. And with this off, we can actually go ahead and remove this rotor. So in order to do that, it will be stuck on there. You can spray on the center there with a little bit of penetrating fluid. Again, we're not saving these, so I will tap these lightly from the back side, and it most likely will pop off. If not, you can take a screw and run on a bolt on each one of these threaded holes, and that will press that off the hub. So let me give it a couple light taps, see if it comes off. If not, we'll get some bolts in there. And as I suspected, a couple light taps, and that did knock loose. So we'll go ahead and slip that off. Again, it will be a little bit tight coming off because you're coming off the studs, and there is brake shoes inside. So that is your emergency brake shoes. So we'll make sure all that's adjusted. It actually looks really good. It's clean in there. They have plenty of life left. So we'll test fit our new rotor on there, make sure all that's adjusted, and then we'll be ready to start going back together. We have our new brake rotor on there. These typically will come with some light oil on them, keep them from rusting and chipping. So go ahead and brake clean them down and clean the oils off. And then we just slid this on, and we're just checking, make sure it's not too tight on the emergency brake shoes. I think we're pretty good there. And we'll be ready to start going back together with that caliper mounting bracket once we get everything cleaned up. Now, if you did have to adjust your emergency brake shoes on the old rotor you took off, there is a rubber plug here, and that goes in this hole here. And if you spin that around in the proper spot, I'll show you with the rotor off will be easier. It's actually at the bottom on this one. So there's a star wheel there. If you line that hole up, you can reach through with an adjusting tool and adjust your emergency brake shoes if you have too much travel in them. Here's the caliper mounting bracket cleaned up. We made sure the slides were, again, freely moving and greased up good. We have our new shims put on there. I will say, don't destroy your old shims when you take them off, because I have ran into the circumstance where the new shims are junk and they don't fit right, and they will make noise. So a quick little tip, as you can see inside that shim there, how it doesn't overhang the caliper mounting bracket on the inside where it would contact the rotor. So if that overhangs, it could possibly contact the rotor and make a squealing noise. And there are tabs. Make sure they're nice and tight. Everything's seated proper. You can see from the side there, it's seated in that spot. Nice. And then test fit your pads. The pads should slide freely side to side in there. Now, there is a lot of different theories on what you should lube in a brake system, what you shouldn't. 100% you should lube the slides. So the slides here where that rubber seal is have to be lubed. It's got to go in and out smoothly. And with that back together, you do want to torque these two mounting bolts for the caliper mounting bracket. Each year and model can vary slightly different, so I'm not going to tell you that. Go ahead and look up your specific car for that. Again, these should be nice and free. Just another quick tip, even when you're bolting metal to metal pieces like this mounting bracket back to the spindle, make sure there's no debris in there, everything's clean, so everything sits flat and flush and tight. Same when you slide your rotor onto your spindle here or your hub. Make sure there's nothing in between, clean everything, and we are ready to actually compress our caliper now. So this is old enough, you don't need a scan tool or anything like that. Again, there's a lot of theory on how to do this proper. A lot of people like to, and that's fine, like to crack the bleeder loose as they're compressing that. It takes all that fluid and kind of pushes it out the bleeder instead of back through the system. The only downside with that is if you were to have a failing hose and the caliper was hanging up because of the hose being collapsed, that wouldn't tell you the full story. So if you take and collapse this with everything still sealed and it collapses easily, then all the system is operating or able to operate like it should. And then you can do a brake bleed and service whatever you want to do later. But that's the way I like to do it. On some of the newer cars, actually some of the older cars require spinning the piston as you compress it, and some of the newer ones actually require a scan tool to electronically retract that piston. But on this one, it's old enough, new enough, old enough, we're just going to compress that piston. And again, they make a lot of different tools to do this. I like that. So we can put that into the back of the piston there and just go on the back of the housing and just adjust this, and you can see that collapses nice and easy. We still got to go a little bit further to get that fully in, but you can see there is no issues with this side anyway. Once we have that compressed, it's just as simple as, like I said, cleaning everything up, slipping it back on, and we're taking our mounting bolts, reattach them to the slides, and we'll go ahead and torque them down also. And we can get that started. There we go. Once we get these torqued down, we'll just do a simple, it's not even torqued down yet, but they are snug. And I always just kind of grab, and you can see how that caliper is floating on there. So it's able, because that piston is not out where it should be yet, we will have to pump the brakes with the final set before we drive this thing. Because there's room there, you can see how that whole piston, or yeah, the caliper, piston, everything slides together there and should be nice and free moving. So when you're done, that's the way it should look. Everything should be back together, tight. Of course, looks very similar to when we took it apart, but now it's got all new parts. Good. New brake pads, new rotor, everything's adjusted. Another quick thing to watch out, and this is kind of a dumb thing. If you make this mistake, you're just not paying attention. So I've seen plenty of times when I've disassembled brakes, people will take the caliper like I had it and kind of spin it around, and they'll twist it around for some reason. I don't know what they're doing, if they're just in a hurry or not paying attention or just don't care, and this hose won't be nice and straight like that. It'll actually be wrapped around, almost tied in a knot, and they'll put that back on. So if I was to take this back off and twist it around one time, this would not be nice and straight like that. It would be all zigzaggy and in a bind, and that is not what you want for your brake hose. So you're only asking for problems with that. These brake hoses can fail. They can fail from the inside. No evidence from the outside, but it will hang your brakes up and make them overheat and prematurely wear out. So just pay attention, and obviously that looks right, so it is right. We have our wheels back on, torqued down, and we're ready to drop this thing down. And before we do anything, we do want to pump the brake pedal, just make sure that piston is all the way out and we don't have a pedal that's not going to stop us. So other than that, we'll take it for a test drive, break in. Most brake manufacturers have a break-in procedure, so keep that in mind. But other than that, new rear brakes on our Subaru, and we can put it back into service. Thanks for stopping by. Have a good day.